Hi, everybody. I'm here with Tim Wilson, a multifaceted development professional. We connected, I would say, a couple of months ago in person, and I was so excited to learn about your work, Tim, and about your podcast. So we're hoping to share a few of those lessons learned today.
Yeah,
Welcome.
my pleasure, Louis. Thank you, Louis.
Well, let me do a very brief introduction, and then maybe we ask you a little bit about your career arc, which has been very interesting. And kind of, you've been in healthcare and academics and really big school and all types of schools. And right now, my understanding is that you're the prospect management and research manager, the inaugural person in that role at Weber State University.
That's
You're having
correct.
a ton
Yes.
of fun, and you're in year two or already planning year three of the pod of your People in Fundraising podcast.
Yeah, currently in season 2 and already planning for the third year. So,
Okay, so tell us about the podcast, and if there's a link to that, give it to me, and I'll put it up on the screen for everybody.
okay, sure. So thank you for having me on today, Louis. I enjoy your content on LinkedIn. That's how we first connected, and I appreciate people like you that are very generous in sharing ideas, trends, things like that on the platform. I think it can only help nonprofit and social impact leaders. So for me, I started People in Fundraising, which the website is peopleinfundraising.com. And there it is. Thank you.
Yeah.
um, I started it, I went live about
Mhm.
18 months ago, but it was an idea I'd had for a number of years beforehand with a very different motivation and a different delivery. I imagined it being more like I would interview people either by phone or by email and ask them how
Mhm.
they got into the profession.
Okay.
And then kind of having like an academic bent to it. What percentage of the people I talked with, fell in to fundraising, the common term we hear.
Okay. So it was a little bit of a research project for you at the beginning.
It was, yeah. And what percent came from for-profit sales, or if they're data analysts, data scientists, did they come from the for-profit data sector? And then the pandemic happened, and we all got
Mhm.
accustomed to Zoom. And I still had the idea and thought the immediacy, the personalness of just what you and I are doing right now, talking face to face in real
Mhm.
time, somewhat extemporaneously with our conversation, but also having scripted questions and
Mhm.
giving the interviewee time to respond and think ahead of time.
Mhm.
I launched it in March of 2022, and as you mentioned, I'm on season 2. I have my 65th interview later today with Mina Das. Thank you.
Amazing. Bravo.
Yeah. um, and the motivation really is just to showcase both the roles that people have in nonprofits, what they do, why they do it, why they stay in this profession, but also who the people are, more importantly, behind in those
Mhm.
roles with those titles. So I try to have a nice balance of tell me how you got into the field and then tell me what makes you tick. And I ask some
Mhm.
questions. I draw from uh, people like Arthur Brooks, Brene Brown. Um, that those are people that I enjoy reading outside of work, but trying to
Mhm.
perhaps impart some of their teachings and findings into my career and then with these guests as well.
Fantastic. Tell us about the cadence for your podcast. And maybe this is me just, being interested in the nitty gritty. How
Sure.
often do you put out an episode? How much production goes into it? Do you record all of the, do you record an entire season in advance and then release them throughout the year? Or do you go like episode by episode? How does that work?
Yeah, great question. And I think as a one-person show, that is still a work in progress. Because I interviewed 40 people last year, and I thought I could just continue Like I have a friend, Randall Hallett in Nebraska, who has his own podcast, and he does, just there's no seasons. It's just every episode is its
Goes
new
on and on and
number, and
on.
yeah, and other people do it different. So that's been me kind of adjusting what works for me.
Mm-hmm.
I air my episodes every Monday, unless it's a United States federal holiday, and then either I'll go the next day or I'll skip a week.
Mm-hmm.
The very light editing on the interviews. They're recorded in one take in Zoom. I've had a couple of people say, "Oh goodness, why did I say that?" Or, I misrepresented this, and so
And Tim is, you're on the record now.
that's right. So I can edit out comments. I was talking to Jana Lee, who works for the Medical College of South Carolina, lives in Minnesota, and I had some technical issues with my lighting, and so it's just learning as you go. So, but I like the idea of doing episodes a year, and I may adjust that as time goes on. But I've just been very appreciative of the people that respond to my outreach to be a guest. They come on the program, representing a wide diversity of roles in U.S. states. I'm venturing into several Canadian provinces as well as international. I think one of the biggest tricks for me, and perhaps for other people that do this type of content, is striving to get a good representation of backgrounds, ethnicities, walks of life. Right now, I'd say my guest list tends to skew more towards frontline fundraising, gift officers, prospect development. Our profession is 70% female, and also about 60% Caucasian. Those are stats I've come across online, and so I, as a white male myself, I'm sensitive to making sure that I'm bringing on guests, highlighting people that don't look or sound like me, or come from different socioeconomic backgrounds or nationalities. I think that's really important for a variety of reasons. And something that admittedly, I think I've struggled with as you look at my guest list for season 2. So one thing that's really helped is for me to go back to previous guests and ask them, who in your network would you recommend that I reach out to, or could you reach out on my behalf, and extend an invitation? And that's worked great. I've got some exciting people coming up. I love the challenge of talking to people in the interview that I've never heard their voice before or talked with. So that's a neat piece of this podcast.
Well, you kind of went into what was going to be my next question, is how do you find people? And do you have a form? Maybe somebody who's interested in the podcast today and says, hey, maybe I can share an interesting perspective with them. Like, how do you connect with people? And what are the best ways to connect with you?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Mostly I proactively reach out to people, and that's based on who's in my network, or like Mina, Das, Jay Frost, you, people that I see putting out content quite a bit. I think, man, there's got to be some additional interesting insights that they can share. I'd love to know more about what makes Lewis think, what makes Jay feel so motivated to interview nonprofit professionals as well. So kind of turning the seat on people like that. I've had a couple of people reach out to me proactively, which is nice. And then on my website, I have my email, which is peopleinfundraising@gmail.com. Or people can message me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/people, Tim Wilson, People in Fundraising.
Okay, lovely. So folks, please do feel free to connect with Tim. I'm also very interested, if you have a few minutes, because the kind of the purpose today is maybe to share a few reflections of what you've learned about the podcast. But if you do have a few seconds, I know your career itself, like you're an interesting person in general, right? So
Well,
your career
thank you.
follows that model, where you've been at a healthcare center, you've been at Harvard Business School. Maybe it's interesting for people to hear about, what got you started and what led you along that path, what your interests were, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Lewis. That's a great question. And I think, I'm just going to say, like, humbly, I'm nothing special. Like, I graduated college not knowing what I was going to do for a career. But I think in acknowledging that, I hope maybe that my story can encourage and motivate other people. I thought about working in library science or being a public school teacher because my father was.
Ah.
And then he worked at a state university in Massachusetts for all of his career, and he could walk to
Mhm.
work every day. And that university was in my backyard. So I from an early age, loved the environment and the academics
Mhm.
of the university.
Is that what they call university brats? I've heard that term, because I think I was a little bit of that too. So
Were you?
yes, kind of a similar story. My father was
Oh.
was teaching at a school.
Well, I'd love to have you on my podcast, Lewis, and then you can tell me about that.
Okay, let's not get too deep. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Quite all right. Yeah, so graduated from State University, UMass
Uh-huh.
Amherst, and really just was like, no idea what I'm going to
Uh-huh.
do. And then I was taking classes at the Harvard Extension School, which is a program for adults at night, and you can matriculate into the program for a master's degree or a
Wow.
certificate. And I found out that if I got a full-time job somewhere at Harvard, they would pay for the majority of the coursework.
Mhm.
So I totally happenstance, and I think that
Mhm.
happens to a lot of the guests I've talked with as well. There are very few avenues right out of studies, out of college, to get into social service, nonprofit, social
Mhm.
impact. Um, so I was temping and
Mhm.
just happened to be placed at the
Nice.
fundraising side of Harvard Business School. And I was helping a mobility impaired colleague who was in a wheelchair. And he was an HBS and a Harvard alum. And he's like, "Hey, I want to try and get you a full-time job here." And I was like,
Wow.
wow. So, I mean, for me and for a lot of the people I've talked with, and probably for countless other people in our profession, the career typically can start out with a blend of right place, right
Mhm.
time, the right person, a mentor that sees something in that young person, whether it's the enthusiasm or personality or a particular skill set. And for me, that happened once I got to HBS. I felt like Paul Callahan was the man I worked with who was a gift officer. And I thought, I don't like the travel aspect of frontline fundraising or the pressure to raise money. And Paul said, well, just down the hall, the prospect research team may be more in line with what you academically and personality
Exactly.
might be interested in. And so a few months later, a job opened up, and 18 years later, I left.
Wow, the rest is history.
Yeah.
Wow, fantastic. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that, Tim. One of the exercises that I found enormously valuable in the donor participation project was to kind of reflect and try to find common threads. And that's why I thought, look, I have a chance to ask that same question to somebody else who has been doing a project for, several years already. So I asked him to come in and identify, maybe start to, see if there is if there are lessons to be learned, no, from people in fundraising of
Yeah.
your podcast. So I, kind of apologize to put you like through this. We could have just had a chat too. I was just genuinely interested, and I know you've put together some really interesting slides.
Yeah,
Um,
no,
yeah, do
however
you have
this conversation.
highlights? Yeah, do you have highlights about your podcast career and what you've learned? You've shared a few just right now, but
Yeah.
what else?
Yeah. No, and hey, don't worry about putting me on the spot. I love the balance, the blend of talking and showing some takeaways. So yeah, Lewis did ask me in preparation for today to share some
Yeah,
takeaways that
let me see.
I've
Give it another try. Okay, there we go. I'll put them up
is
for everybody.
is that working now?
I see them. Is if somebody is with us and if you could chat in whether you're seeing them or not, that would be helpful.
So I'm on slide 2. Is that reflecting on your end?
Yep.
Okay. Great. Yeah, so that's the logo. I got it for free on on a website, made it for free because again, this is a one-person show. Um, I like this quote from Walt Disney himself. I mean, he arrived in Southern California with I think $40 in his suitcase as a young man, and he had this dream. And by no means am I comparing myself for this project to Walt Disney or his experience, but I just love the sense of let's try something, let's see where it
Hmm.
goes, and tweak along the way, and always having that enthusiasm that you can have at the beginning of a project. And this is a quote he would tell uh, animators and engineers constantly throughout his career. It wasn't just a one-time thing. So for key takeaways, that's one for me is just, whatever point you are in your career, for me, I was almost 19 years into my profession before I was managing a team of prospect development people. And that felt like I
Hmm.
was way behind the curve, but in a way I was just getting started, and it was a great experience for me. Um, so again, so key takeaways. First one, kind of selfishly, or it's in my wheelhouse. Where is your prospect development team sitting? Your researchers, your prospect managers, portfolio relationship managers. This was a great insight from Ruthie Giles, who's on the Nedra board, and I interviewed her in season 1. Another person that is very generous at sharing content and ideas online. She also consults with Marianne Pelletier at Stopel Analytics. Ruthie talked about this in our conversation. I've seen it in my career, I'm sure others have as well, where prospect development may be housed with advancement services, the gift
Hmm.
processing team, business operations, maybe with the major gifts team. And Ruthie has, at least when I talked with her, she had this idea to find ways of highlighting and advocating that prospect development is really the wheel of the spoke. And if we can get from prospect development's perspective, the closer we can get to being the center of the organization, as opposed to being a spoke or an affiliate trying to get a seat at the table,
Hmm.
the better we can impact our development operations, support our
Hmm.
gift officers and such. I really like that. I don't know exactly where Ruthie is in making more of a case for this. She talked about maybe being a book, but definitely someone that I admire and want to support that idea. Another theme that came up quite a bit in my interviews is the importance of work friends, and particularly where a lot of us are working hybrid or fully remote the last few years, struggling to make a deeper connection. Uh,
Hmm.
can be hard to do with Slack, texting, even my podcasts. I'm under no illusion that most of the people walk away thinking that Tim and I are great friends now. It's a great connector,
That's
and
true.
through that, obviously, continued connection and partnership can come. in this sense, the importance of work friends, the people you work with day by day. And Lewis, you likely see this as well with the people you consult with and interact with online. Just the richness of relationships we can have in various forms.
Totally agree.
Following someone on LinkedIn, in this case, going deeper and just having a trusted confidant in the workplace, whether that's gift officer, fundraiser to another gift officer, fundraiser, or prospect development to the vice president of advancement. Just that's harder to do given the variety of work settings now. And I'm a big proponent of hybrid and flexibility and fully remote. I even still see the need for that, and what can I do in my
Yeah, and it's not so much. Sorry to interrupt you, Tim, but
yeah.
it's also not so much where you are, right?
Yeah.
Necessarily physically nowadays. But I have kind of a shortcut to this, which is doing stuff together is to me kind of the quickest, most reliable way to have build these trusting relationships that you just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, that it doesn't matter physically where you are. And I think John Shoffroth from Harvard Business School was one of my guests last season, and he talked about this and mentioned in his experience, when you have a bad day at the office, when a gift officer is very excited, when a prospect development person has done the research on a particular donor or prospect, the development director goes to the meeting, and anticipation is high, and unbeknownst to anyone else, something's happened with that prospect's career or family life, and the meeting goes 180. And John said, he mentioned a specific incident where he's like, it just was so meaningful to have someone back at the office that I could call and commiserate with and help talk me through it. So that was definitely a takeaway. This, and I'm guilty of this, Lewis. I started our conversation off like this. How nonprofit people talk about how they entered this profession. Quite a few guests have said, and they're self-aware about using this term as well, or the phrase, that they fell into it. And I've had one or two interviewees kind of in the moment brainstorm, how can we better illustrate how our careers in the nonprofit sector began? What can we use to summarize how our career started, instead of I fell into it, or just happened by luck, by chance?
Yeah.
And Jimmy Martello from Intermountain Health, which is where I worked after Harvard Business School, he's the vice president of advancement and philanthropy there. He talked about, in his opinion, and I agree with him, a lot of people just use that phrase, I fell into it, because they don't want to monopolize the conversation and take a few minutes, like I did at the beginning, to share with a donor or a prospect or other people how they entered the field without there being too many clear-cut ways. So cutting to the chase, saying I fell into it, is definitely a cultural parlance. So, and I know there's been conversation, and I've used the term here a couple of times too. I've seen on LinkedIn with other cultural language similar to I fell into it. I've seen a lot lately about we shouldn't call our work nonprofit. We should call it social impact or social good. Have you seen that at all? Any of that chatter?
Sure, the framing of it, of course, and nonprofit being a tax status, not a business model. I see phrases about it. Yeah, and the falling into it. Yeah, I hadn't really reflected on it, Tim, but now that you mention it, I see how it can also rub some people in kind of like a privileged way.
Mm,
Because yeah, you fell into it, because you were in a certain situation where people fall into these things.
yeah,
Whereas in other situations, people you fall into other types of things.
yeah,
So I see how, and like Tyler is saying in the comments, it's touchy for some people, maybe increasingly so. That's a really good lesson that you've shared.
and that's a great takeaway. The framing of it as a privilege, and I think admittedly that was the case for me. It just didn't plan it and happened to be at the right place at that time. So thank you, Tyler, for your comment too. Um, New career paths in nonprofits has been a theme. I've had a few guests who've started in prospect research and went to frontline, or they started in donor relations and went to frontline. Um, and again, I think um, that's I like to highlight those scenarios and ask the interviewees, how did you go from one siloed role to maybe a more forward-facing role?
I love this
And
one.
that's interesting. Was it something that they felt they needed at that point in the career, or did a supervisor or a recruiter see something in that person and said, "Hey, have you thought about going to the front line? Have you thought about uh, going from being a prospect data analyst to the reporting side?" So that's interesting. I like talking to people that have branched out and having them share what that experience has been for them to kind of take that leap of professional faith and forge a new path. And here, there's a little dirt road next to the tree, but then there's sort of the semicircle paving stones. So, sometimes you have to forge that path yourself with your own 2 feet, and other times it can be, from Tyler's point about privilege, it can be a sense of privilege where um, someone sees something in you and brings you along. A few people have
Tim,
talked
I may
about new
have.
yeah.
So, sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you for a second. I may have you interviewed by any chance Joanna Schofield? She's at Hopkins. How could if not?
Yeah, I'm talking with her in the fall.
Okay, good. She's the poster child example.
Yeah, what can you share with us about her?
Oh my, no, I won't. I won't do it other than to say that she's absolutely wonderful. That she went through that career transition, going. I hate the word back office, but going from a non-frontline role to a frontline role, and I admire her in every which way. She's also a founder of a nonprofit organization, and I'm involved with that too. So, like the full package, quite amazing. So I think that's going to be a good episode.
Yeah, wonderful. And thank you for mentioning Joanna's name. I'm excited to chat with her, and definitely a person that fits that mold of how they went from
Mhm.
one sector to another. Other takeaways guests have talked about um, how they can rise to leadership roles at organizations, but be sensitive to people that maybe they don't want to manage a team, or they've managed a team in the past and it wasn't their strong suit, or had a difficult experience with people they've managed.
Mhm.
Also, and when guests have talked about new paths to leadership, they're typically talking about not just managing a team of prospect development or the team of major
Mhm.
gift officers, but the entire operation.
Mhm.
And that's definitely in a lot of people's experience, we see that there can be a clear path in a lot of places for someone to start out maybe as an annual fund, go to major gifts, leadership gifts, principal gifts, plan gifts, and then, oh, they're now the director of development because they have been successful in managing the donor relationships and managing their metrics, and
Mhm.
now they're managing the team. Well, what about people that manage a team of 12 prospect development staff, and they have research, portfolio analysis, data analytics? What about people that manage business and IT teams in a nonprofit, and they're
Mhm.
looking at overseeing reporting and gift processing, and they've definitely managed complex, multifaceted teams for that nonprofit.
Yeah.
How can we give those people a chance to, if they want to lead the entire organization? Because they're going to bring a very different perspective, thought process, language to being the director of that nonprofit's development shop. So an interesting concept. And then, related to that, people that have embodied nonprofit organizations culture, not just the ones that have brought in the most money and hit their metrics. So
Mhm.
I have yet to see this in my interviews to a great extent, but it's been something that a few people have talked about. So interesting ideas there.
Yeah, but I think it also speaks to career paths. I mean, as a maybe it's a short, as a parallel concept to leadership. But having a career, if you're a fantastic performer, typically there's not a very good career path that doesn't involve management.
Yeah,
And then that's from the whole team, you just have one manager, right? So then that kind of narrows the field down a whole lot. So it's complicated, that's for sure.
definitely. Yeah. This one here, I mean, close to my heart and perhaps close to other people's hearts that are not on the front line. How can we in the prospect development or donor relations, advancement services areas advocate for more resources? Related to that is, how can we have gift officers help make our case with us, for us?
Mhm.
And I really like that idea that came up from, I think definitely from Ruthie, and then I think John Shawfroth again at Harvard Business School, as well as Colette Wixon Call, who was at UC San Diego when I talked with her last year. And she's done it all. She's worked in various states, has an incredible perspective on fundraising,
Mhm.
and definitely someone who sees the value of the multifaceted team approach to help her and her gift officers be successful.
Mhm.
So, and another one here is, again, getting back to that theme of the spoke and the wheel at the beginning. How can we get access to leadership? How can we, if we want to rise to leadership, if we're not invited to the table? So that has been something I've seen in my career and other guests have talked about.
Yeah, Jessica has a good comment here, where she says, "Time what there was a time when you had to know someone to learn how to do PD. I don't know, prospect development. Proud that is no longer the case."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like
Thank you for commenting, Jessica.
kind of building a more inclusive field, right? At the leadership level, at the entry levels.
Yeah. Well put. And I can't see the screen because I'm just trying to make sure I'm advancing the slides. But yeah, Jessica has been a terrific supporter of my podcast. She's was a guest. I had her interview aired a few weeks ago, right before her birthday. So happy birthday,
Happy
Jess.
birthday.
And someone, again, I really admire for the advocacy and the support that she brings to prospect development. Jessica has worked in various states and so brings a really interesting perspective, just like Colette I talked about earlier. Jessica gives back through APRA in various forms. So I was just honored to have her on the program.
Lovely, great people.
Yeah. So some ideas here about how we can bridge that gap. We need to advocate more. And this slide was, from my perspective, with prospect development, but I think other areas as well. I remember at Harvard Business School, I worked with a woman named Erin Lawler, and she's going to be a guest with her husband on Friday. Chris works in prospect development. Erin works in donor relations and stewardship. And I remember probably 10 years ago, she started putting out with her team these monthly reports that touched on all areas of donor relations and stewardship and gift opportunities. And she said, your team, Prospect Research, you guys should do that too. And it's just stuck with me. And so I've done that after leaving HBS. I wasn't in a place to be the disseminator of that information, but whether it's prospect development or other teams, really sharing, highlighting, showcasing the work we're doing to support everyone in our team is critical.
So it's so funny how sometimes just those like communication hacks, I don't know, you're not doing any, I mean, you're doing a little bit of more work, but you're not doing any more work, but suddenly it puts your work in a whole different light, right? Internally.
Absolutely.
Which is a little bit of what you're doing with fundraising as a career with your podcast. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anne has a question. Anne is absolutely fantastic. And C is asking, are you seeing more people studying nonprofit organization in colleges? This profession needs to be so much more intentional in recruiting the next generation of fundraisers.
That is a great question, Anne. And it's outside of my scope at this point. I don't have resources I have not looked for the resources about that, but definitely a critical process that we need to enhance. Just like, talking the language of a donor life cycle, we've got to build a pipeline of donors now to become major gift and principal gift donors in the future. Same concept applies here. So unfortunately, I'm not familiar enough to comment. Lewis, do you have any insights on that?
I don't know about how many students there are. I will be teaching a class at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy this fall, so maybe I'll ask around.
Dynamite.
We can get we can hear straight from the data source.
That's awesome.
More.
I will say, sorry, I just as I was rereading Anne's comment, I am familiar with John Schaffrath from Harvard Business School. He teaches or he oversees a team of faculty at Boston University's professional fundraising certificate program. So there are programs out there for certificates beyond the regular and well-established CFRE accreditation. That's what I'm familiar with. But again, it's people that are post university, they're maybe young in their career, or they've looking for a career change. But yeah, not so much at the beginning or in the university setting.
That's true. And anecdotally, recent generations of alums seem to me to be more interested than average in philanthropy and social causes. So what I experienced was huge involvement and lots of hunger, lots of wanting to know. So I think the interest is there. Maybe things like, our conversations now that are making our sector much more approachable, maybe that helps in a small way.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'm not putting Aaron's question up on the screen because it will take up the whole screen. But I'm joking, Aaron. But as someone new to nonprofit management with a background in business development, I've noticed the distinctiveness of prospects in both the nonprofit sector and traditional business settings. Every individual plays a vital role with a team, each with a specific purpose. It's interesting how some might distance themselves by saying, I'm not involved in business or prospect development. And this always catches his attention. Each member contributes to the overall identity and success. This kind of brings home a point, which is that a lot of the things that we think are unique to nonprofits really happen in lots of different types of sales and business development environments, like short turnover. Everybody else in the business kind of saying, okay, that's sales, that's that's advancement, things like that. No.
Interesting.
But let me see, Chris. Chris says he wasn't even aware. He's confirming your findings. He wasn't even aware that this was even a career option for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned earlier with my father working for 50 years at Bridgewater State University in southeastern Massachusetts. I was around that college campus, even in my more aware times of life as a teenager and beyond. And it was probably when I went to undergrad and heard about the phonathon that I first had an inkling that this is a profession, and it was student callers. But yeah, we can do more to get the word out about our profession and the richness that it can bring to us professionally and personally. And I think it may start with Anne's question earlier about how many people are studying this in undergrad, and Chris's insightful comment here too, that a lot of us just aren't aware of it until we get introduced to it by someone else. So
folks, let's just try to share more. I mean, I'm not going to say be louder. I don't think, I always find development professionals seem, we're always kind of like we try to be in the background, but I think there's space to share more pride in our work. Tim, what is your vision for either the podcast or for prospect development? Maybe just very generally, or careers in fundraising. What would your highest hopes be in the next 3 to 5 years?
Next 3 to 5 years. That's a great question. I intend to continue being a host for the People in Fundraising podcast. I'd like to see it continue. I'd like to get to 500 interviews.
Yay.
I think I would, I don't, and then again, I have run up with the constraints of my full-time job at Weber State and my family of 4 kids that soon will be going to college themselves. So I don't even know how to go about some of these things with the podcast, but perhaps having a vendor sponsor episodes, or I don't even know if underwriting is the right term for that, but I hear it on the radio.
It's like public radio. Exactly. Do you see a book? Could you see a book out of some of these stories? Could you see something written come out of this?
Absolutely. And that's a great question. I use Zoom for these interviews, and there is a feature where you can transcribe the recorded interview. So that would save a ton of time. And I keep every video interview in various locations. So it's on YouTube, it's on LinkedIn, it's in like 3 or 4 places on my own computer, my personal computer, not my work computer. So
very important distinction.
Yeah. So definitely with the podcast, continuing that. I'm hopeful that in that 3 to 5 year window, I could bring on perhaps a student worker. We have student workers at Weber State in the development office. That would be that could get maybe, very small way to Anne's question about how many people are studying this in college. So helping me do some work, but also helping them come away with a nibble about what nonprofit work is like. That would be a goal of mine at Weber State. So we'll see. I'm content there. I love working back in higher ed. So
that's amazing. So just to summarize a little bit of what we've learned from you, we've learned about creating a more inclusive sector. We've learned about communicating better internally as a way to highlight your function, and maybe think of, I'm going to say prospect development, but I think almost every function will want to be closer to the to the center of the wheel. So think of how you can become more critical and more integral to just the entire operation. We've talked about career paths and how Tim's guests are feeling that as an issue. We've heard several. There's lots of conversations happening around it, right? And then we've talked a little bit about encouraging people to get content out, share about their career, maybe check out peopleinfundraising.com and fill in the form there. You might be a guest sometime or just listening.
Yeah.
And if anybody has questions, we have a couple of minutes, and we're fortunate to have Tim here with us. So feel free to ask away. Sometimes there's a little bit of a lag, Tim, so maybe
That's okay.
Put on the filler music. I'll take out the world's teeniest violin. I'll play a tune here. Here we go.
And yeah, I'd be delighted to talk with anyone offline. Again, Tim Wilson, People in Fundraising. That's my LinkedIn account. So please message me there, friend me on there, and then my website.
Let's see. Well, thank you, Aaron. Aaron has a nice note for you. We're trying to be helpful here. Yeah, I think that's kind of where we're trying to both, number one, learn, and two, do it in a way that's digestible and helpful for people. Maybe a little bit entertaining sometimes. We promise we won't dance.
Yeah, I think for me, with this podcast, I don't cover best practices or trends. That personally doesn't motivate me as much or nearly as much as getting to know the person with the role at these nonprofits. And if I could just share a couple more slides here.
Oh, please.
They're quotes. And I think, for me, what am I taking away from this endeavor and the people that I'm grateful to know, and they're generous with their time, whether it's in APRA or in the profession or through my podcast. This was a quote from John Wooden, who I believe is the winningest college basketball coach in Division I NCAA history, a man of religious faith and morals, and talked with his team about winning is great, but it's who you are to your teammates and your family and your professors and beyond, the lessons you can learn in life that you're developing when he was coaching them on the team. And he said, be more concerned with your character than your reputation, because your character is what you really are, while your reputation is merely what others think of you.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's like being trustworthy versus building trust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then just one more here. I mentioned Arthur Brooks, who's a social scientist and an author. He has written a book about donor behavior. It came out probably 15 years ago. I believe it's called, I forget, but it's like Who Really Gives? And he's branched out into lots of other subject matter with these longitudinal studies of people, and he writes for The Atlantic every week. And when I saw this quote from him, I felt like, yeah, okay, I'm kind of at the midpoint of my career, and my podcast and the volunteer roles I take on in prospect development speak to Arthur's quote here. I think a lot of us can make such an impact as we get into that midpoint of our career and beyond by sharing what we've learned, the good and the bad and the hard, and helping to bring up the next generation. And that can be even more valuable and rewarding than, oh, I wrote 300 research profiles, or I identified 120 principal gift prospects. All well and important to the critical mission of your nonprofit. I think professionally and personally, this quote can be even more beneficial. So it's devote the back half of your life to serving others with your wisdom. Get old sharing the things you believe are most important. And I really resonated with that and felt that by this podcast and other means of giving back, that I am selfishly benefiting because I'm connecting with great people like you, Lewis, and other people, and being in touch with what's on your minds and having those connections. It makes for a more robust and rewarding career and frankly personal life too.
Lovely. And there's already some good conversations happening in the chat. I'm going to summarize, and maybe we invite everybody to connect on LinkedIn with each other. I run this little group called the Donor Participation Project, another great place to have conversations like this one.
Yeah.
But what let me put up the link for that on the screen. But what Aaron is mentioning is that he's found, coming from a different type of organization, that nonprofits that tend to be very, I don't know, he says polite, or I've seen the word democratic, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but that his style doesn't kind of go culturally with what he's finding. I kind of can identify with that. I don't know. Any thoughts there? Any words of advice? I think Jessica has some great thoughts in the chat.
I'm trying to find the whole quote here. Oh, here we go. Yeah, and that's, Aaron, that's been my experience too. There's a finesse, there's a delicacy to conversations that I think can really impede the work. And my team at Weber State is reading a book right now called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And you're familiar with it?
Yes.
And that's been a takeaway for me and for other people on the team, is that, just like Aaron said, that there's a delicacy and a niceness to it, to a lot of our conversations and engagement with our coworkers, that doesn't lend itself easily to straight shooters. But we need to have a culture where critical commentary and disagreement, professionally put, can happen. And so I'd recommend that book. I have no say in the matter, but it's very topical because we're reading it as a team right now.
Yeah. There's another thought is also that maybe in comparison to other for-profit companies, nonprofits tend to have lots of different goals, even inside your same department. There's a fundraising goal, but that's not the only goal. There's a participation goal. There's an advocacy goal. There's a board management goal where you're working directly with the governance of the institution. And and that kind of leads to trying to find consensus in everything. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but to me, this kind of explains that. So you're having a conversation with somebody that you think is about achieving this goal, but they have different goals. And this happens much more frequently than in other types of organizations that, other for-profit organizations I've been involved with, just because it's pretty simple, right? We're either selling or we have more revenue or less revenue. And in a way that aligns everybody a little bit more. I don't know if this helps, Aaron, but.
Yeah. And Chris mentioned that Patrick Lencioni has a new book, The 6 Types of Working Genius. And he answered Aaron's question. The previous book by Patrick Lencioni was The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's a very quick read. It's probably 4 hours tops. And each chapter is a handful of pages with a hypothetical team dynamic scenario, and it moves really well. So I definitely recommend it.
And you'll find yourself identify. I've been in situations describing all the dysfunctions. So I don't know, maybe the same thing. I was a contributing factor to some of them, unfortunately. Tim, it's been great to have you join. Thanks so very much. I wish you much success. Please let us know how we can support you on your journey, and hope to stay in touch.
Well, Lewis, this has been an honor. Thank you for having me on today, and thank you for everyone making time in your schedule to participate, be here today, and I'm happy to connect with anyone. And Lewis, happy to support you as well in any way. So thank you for this time today.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. See ya.